everyone. Welcome to the Therapist Invitation. I'm Dr. Mark Mayfield.
And I'm Trevor Sharon.
And today we're going to talk about something that I think spans generations.
Exactly. But is more prominent, I think, in the millennial generation than it has others.
I was going to say the 80s generation.
This will be fun to dive into.
Fun. Okay. We're going to talk about nostalgia.
Yeah.
And those moments where, like, I don't know, the best way I can describe nostalgia for me is I'm sitting and I get this like almost deja vu flashback of something from my childhood that's just like, oh
yeah,
like I want to go buy some Lucky Charms and pull out a Nintendo and you know and play. Yeah. But I think it crosses, I mean, a bunch of different I think genres and things. I get nostalgic when I smell honeysuckle, and it takes me back to my grandmother's backyard and playing hide and seek in this massive Californian,
how very Narnia of you.
Well, yeah, I mean some of the big fir trees that we would hide under and play under and all that kind of stuff, and the hedges that you had little tunnels that you can come absolutely. So there's deja vu and nostalgia. We're not talking about deja vu, we're talking about nostalgia.
Although we should do an episode on
deja vu. That'd be good too.
It's a lot of theory, like, because we still don't know exactly what it is, but there's some really good ideas.
There is.
Okay, so I kind of want to bypass our something good, because I feel like our entire episode is going to have some of that. So let's maybe instead start with a more clinical definition of nostalgia, what it does to our emotional and mental state.
Put me on the spot. I don't know. That's a good question.
Yeah. Well, okay. So you mentioned the smell of honeysuckle.
Sure.
Our memory is more closely linked to our olfactory nerves than others, and so our sense of smell is more closely connected with memories anyway. So that's why you typically have more memory moments. Like if you watch a TV show and they have a flashback, you're gonna have more flashbacks at a smell than other things.
If you're in trauma, it's different, but we're not talking about trauma right now.
This is almost stuff. The opposite of trauma.
It is, yeah.
Which might have some significance later on.
Well, but that's where you walk into a musty garage and it takes you back to your great-grandpa's house, or those kinds of things. Yeah, that's good.
Depending on who you are, and I think I've mentioned on this show a couple times that, like, my experience with individuals with, like, dementia, they tend to, at least the ones that I've had personal interaction with, fall back to a time in their lives that was traumatic and difficult. I think we do the opposite with normal memories, where we look back with rose-colored glasses and we think about things that were really painful or terrible very fondly. And we have this sense of the grass is greener in the past than it was today.
But I think that's just how we want to think about things.
Right.
I think it's a choice to some degree, but I also think it's not. So, like, when I hear the Mario theme song or, Sega Genesis, with the, Hedgehog, Sonic the Hedgehog type stuff. It's like,
it's a tangible memory.
Tangible memory. Or I think through, commercials. Mm-hmm. Like I remember, I don't know where it was. I saw like they call them vintage now. I'm like, thanks people. Like that wasn't vintage in the 80s here, but the McDonald's commercials or the Burger King commercials and that kind of stuff. It's that's kind of the nostalgic piece
for sure.
But you think about what's really hot right now is comic books.
Yep.
Comic books and trading cards, whether it be Pokemon or baseball cards or
Magic
basketball cards and all those are back in like full force.
Oh yeah. D&D is also, I mean, we had the demonic, what's it called? Where D&D was demonized.
Oh yeah, because it was misunderstood.
Yeah. But I mean, think back, there's two kind of ways that we can interact. There's the times where you might look back on the video game Battletoads and think like, oh man, that was such a good game. I loved that game. I'm going to play it again. And then you play it again and you're like, how did this ever get published? Because it's literally the hardest video game in the world. Yep. Notoriously for that. And so
or Atari and Pong.
So we can look back and we can either keep it safe in our memory and so we either jump in and it's like, oh, this is a wonderful experience. I remember everything. Or, oh, this ruined my memory because now I'm remembering all the bad stuff that I chose to forget.
Mm-hmm.
I think that some of this is really well represented by the millennial generation. Let me explain. So, Mark, your fond memories of childhood are probably going to be 80s,
early
90s. Mine are going to be mid 90s, mid 2000s, somewhere in that range.
So we're going from Gen Z to millennial.
Yep.
Okay.
Now, for me as a millennial, and if you have problems with the terms we're using, I don't know if we've done an episode on generation. I think we did.
Yeah, and don't tune out if you think millennials are all a certain type of people. So,
we'll have kids now and jobs. Hopefully, some of us have jobs.
Kids.
Try to.
Definitely
some
kids.
of us have kids. Okay, so as a millennial, I was born in '93, and so I was 6 years old when Columbine happened. It happened on my birthday.
That's right. Yeah.
And I remember I was in a Joe's Crab Shack having my birthday.
Are those exist anymore?
They do.
They really?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Talking about nostalgia.
I know, right? Not a good one though.
No. Food poisoning nostalgia.
And I remember everybody being super weird at my party, and not realizing what was happening, but realizing something was happening.
Right.
Then skip forward a little bit. We have 9/11.
So 4 years.
Then skip
3 years.
Yep. Then skip forward a little bit more. We have the Great Recession.
Mm-hmm. Step
forward a little bit more. We have another recession and 2020 as a year.
Watch your mouth.
Here's why I bring this up. I think that millennials have a firm vice grip on nostalgia because if we look back at the 90s and all of the things that were sold to us on television and the shows that we watched and the toys that we played with, that was a time before the world seemed so ugly. Not that the world wasn't ugly before that.
I was going to say, what happened to, my generation where, we had Reagan getting shot.
For sure.
We had, the great gas crisis. We had the recession in 84, 87. Gulf War broke out. I remember at 6 years old. And so if you're talking about 6 years old, sitting in my parents' living room with the news on a little, hand change tube TV, watching, missiles go off, going, I don't understand what's going on.
Mm-hmm.
But that was the inception of 24/7 news.
Right.
And then, the early 90s were not a whole lot, but then Columbine and 9/11 and that stuff too. So yeah, I think every generation has that. And it's interesting because I think we are so, and this might be a different topic for a different time, but we're so up in arms about what's going on in our country right now with the racial tensions and political stuff and whatnot. I'm going, guys, like every generation's had this in a different way. You think,
which doesn't mean we shouldn't be fighting for what's right.
No,
but it does mean
we're not abnormal.
Right.
Because we had Vietnam and you had the Cold War and you had the Civil Rights Movement and you had all these things in the 60s and 70s,
Yeah. When we have one of the things that we offer in counseling, one of the benefits of counseling is a different perspective.
Yes.
Something outside and with a little bit more scope and to be able to look at things. And so it does become hard when, for me, having, from 99 to 2000 be full of crisis after crisis after crisis.
99, 2001, right? 9/11. Yep.
I think, but 99, I think, was Columbine.
99, 2000, 2001. Yes, there was 3 years of stuff there.
Of just constant chaos and crisis. And so being able to choose a time, choose things that trigger memories for me that are safe from the touch of current crisis and past crisis, I think offers a little bit of that other perspective. It
does. Yeah, true. Well, and as you're talking, I'm thinking about what stuff from my childhood have I kept in my life. And I'm thinking about, some people have kept, old school video games, that kind of stuff. I'm never a video game person.
Even though it's come up so often in this episode.
Right.
Yeah.
But I think, as a kid, there was the desire to have it.
Yeah.
And I never was given it.
Yep.
But now I borrowed one from you once and it just never took off type of thing. I do think though, if we had a vintage original Nintendo, I might, well, I don't know, but Legos.
Legos
have been something that have stuck, and it's been kind of our family culture now that if we want a downtime or have some fun, we go get a Lego set.
Yeah.
So that's a nostalgic piece for us. You know, I wonder what's stuck with you.
It's a lot, especially as I've gotten more into like graphic design and creative spaces. A lot of the stylings of the 90s and early 2000s, music for sure. Like the emos playlist of the 2000s is like my go-to.
Look that up if you don't know what that is.
So good. I mean, I was definitely an emo kid back in the day. Not an e-boy like they are today.
I don't even know what that is.
It's dumb.
Okay.
You know, I'm an older person now, so I can say that.
I don't know if you can say that until you're in your 30s.
I don't know. It's probably. Okay, so how about this, Mark? I'm interested to hear from you. Do you want to take the side of nostalgia can be bad or nostalgia can be good? Whichever one you don't take, I'll do.
I'll take the other one. I think I'll take the nostalgia can be bad.
Okay.
Because I've got some ideas of what that would look like.
Yeah.
So
okay. Mark, tell me why nostalgia can be a bad thing.
Well, I think it keeps you stuck in the past.
Mm-hmm.
I've worked with a lot of clients or married couples that are so stinking frustrated with their spouse because they are perpetual video game players or, you know, D&D players or, you know, back in my day it was, oh gosh, what's that? I can't even think of it now. The board game, strategic board game, Risk. You know, I've had couples that come in and like, he played this in college and now he just plays it with his friends and they, you know, my weekends are lost because that's all he does and blah, blah, blah. And
so like delayed development.
Delayed development. Yeah. I think can be definitely a detriment to progress.
Mm-hmm. I think on the opposite side of how nostalgia can be really good, I talk with my clients pretty consistently that it's unrealistic for us to expect ourselves to have active coping all the time.
Sure.
We cannot actively cope with distress all the time.
Right.
We don't have the energy. We don't have the capacity. And so we need to have passive coping skills. And I think that nostalgia can be one of those passive coping skills of being able to not necessarily regress, but to go back to a time that felt safer and engage in things that remind you that there is still safety in the world. Back to you, Mark.
Sure. But when does that, when does that cross the line?
Yeah.
So I think passive coping skills can be an excuse. Like how many times do we get stuck using food as a passive coping skill or use, TV or movies or, alcohol or pornography or those kinds of things as passive coping skills. And none of, and there's some of those that aren't good, period. I think you could figure that out, which ones aren't good, period. But it's like, what is it? Where's the line? And how do we help coach people on the line? Because I think a lot of times, especially, I'm not picking on millennials, but millennials and some Gen Zers, like they're stuck. They are arrestedly developed. And, I think, I wonder if you look back to, as of late, divorce rates, are they linked to maladaptive coping skills, communication skills, but stuckness? Like I remember this one spouse was just about ready to kill their, hype quotes.
Possibly,
air quotes.
Yeah, probably.
Not we'd make a report on that one if that was good. But no, she was just done.
Yeah.
Like all he does is wants to do this. And we were finally getting down into the root causes of these things. And it was, he didn't know how to cope with present circumstances and stresses. And so it was easier to escape to a simpler time and play video games.
Yeah.
And he wasn't playing first person shooter. He was playing like Sonic the Hedgehog and Minecraft and that kind of stuff.
My counter argument is one of the best ways to build expertise and confidence is through practice and experience of competency.
Sure.
Like if I do something once, I'm not going to feel very competent by it if it's something challenging. But then if I do it a second time, I'm going to feel way more confident than the first time.
Sure.
And then I may feel an additional amount of expertise. And so with nostalgia, like my wife and I played some of the old games.
Watch it.
Well,
how old?
I mean, they span generations.
Okay.
Because it's the game where you put spoons on a table in a certain order, and you have a secret code to communicate what the number actually is. Like old games.
Yeah. Okay. Thought you were to age me here for a second. Yeah.
No. Like my mom showed up and we were teaching it to the rest of the family, and she showed up and she played it like a pro. Like
nice.
She was looking at the spoons, just like, huh? So
but your mom isn't even 50 yet.
3. Yeah, she's super young.
She's young.
Okay, so like Bree and I felt very confident and like experts being able to now be the leaders of this game that we struggled with as kids because we didn't know it.
Yeah.
And I think that to what you're talking about of arrested development, I think that nostalgia can still be used to build confidence and expertise where you can look back and say like, oh, I do have experience. I do know these things. I've experienced this history. And so now I'm better equipped to move forward.
Yes. And not everybody's as healthy as you and Bree.
Okay. Yeah. Speak more on that.
Well, but you have done a lot of self-work.
Mm-hmm.
You know, as individuals, as a couple, you've got great families that really keep you in check and that kind of stuff. What if they don't have that?
Yeah.
Because I think what you're speaking to is true, but again, it goes back to that line of when is that line crossed and it's now maladaptive because they aren't healthy.
Yeah. So are you saying that it would be better for us to put nostalgia in a lockbox, and once we reach a certain point of development, we can unlock it and start using it?
I mean, I think that's an interesting argument, and I don't know if I would disagree with that. Like, it'd be one thing for me to, constantly go to Walmart and spend hundreds of dollars a week on Legos and come home and that's all I do versus going, okay, I know that I'm having a rough week and this brings I'm good at this. I enjoy it. And it brings some sense of solace and peace. So now it's time to pull that out.
So the key element I'm hearing from you is that line that you've mentioned a couple times. Sounds to me like it's intentionality.
I would say so. Because, I mean, how many times have we talked over the years, and we were just talking off mic, we've known each other for 5 years.
Yep.
And, 5 years ago, we were young in our own rights, and how much our relationship has grown, how much we've, the health of it, because we've had conflict and we've had disappointment and we've had disagreements and we've had,
trial and error.
Yeah. And good stuff and all that kind of stuff. Right. But we also talked in the years, and I'm not going to say this on mic, but, we've talked about our vices and the things that we've struggled with. And I think that is where it gets bad, right? Some of the vices that I've struggled with in my lifetime have been because I don't know myself. My phrase that I share all the time is becoming old friends with your emotions. I think in the last 10 years, I've really become old friends with my anxiety. And so I'm not scrambling to find something to soothe it. Yeah. And I think that's maybe where the line is. And I do think the intentionality piece, right? I know this is a hard week, and here's why it's a hard week. Yeah. And it would be great to do something that is reminiscent. And so I'm going to choose to watch Princess Bride. Yeah. Like one of my nostalgic things right now that we're doing with the family is we're going back to all of the old shows I used to watch. Yeah. So we just finished Family Matters.
Which that was fast.
COVID.
Dang.
Yeah, I started in May.
Wow.
So now we're watching Boy Meets World. Right? And I would imagine that if you were to watch Boy Meets World, you're like, why in the world?
Yeah, it doesn't connect with
why?
me.
I don't get it. And I remember there's been times where like you guys were excited to show us the show, and we're like,
I remember going over to your house years ago and watching Newsies.
Yeah, and you're sitting there going,
and Bree and I were like, so bored.
What the heck? Yeah, but it was nostalgic for us, right? And so, but I think that's where the generational piece is. So I think for something for us going, COVID's not over. Yeah, things are still uncertain. Yeah, elections. When this is recorded or airing.
Well, yeah, it's post Christmas.
Yeah, it's post Christmas, so elections already happened, right? But we're doing things that just there's some sense of normalcy. Yeah. And I think we're doing that for our girls too. And it's not maladaptive. So we're not sitting upstairs eating dinner around the TV. We're eating dinner, having time together as a family, and then going, oh, let's go watch an episode. Yeah. And then, but I will say, and I'm not going to put one of my, my daughters on the spot, but there was an episode a couple of days ago that we were watching that sparked something in one of my kids, and they came and said, hey, I messed up. I did this. and it was a good learning lesson. Yeah. So I don't know. Yeah. I'm babbling here, but
it's interesting too, like thinking about how this episode is going to come out around Christmas. I can't remember if it's post Christmas or not. Tell us in the comments.
Yeah.
No, don't.
Hey.
And like I think that sometimes we can even use this as a negative coping strategy or something that propels our frustration or irritation with the world, especially around holidays. Because like, I mean, if you think about, I mean, for me, it was probably around the ages of like 8 to 12. And it's in that stage where gifts become a lot harder because like, what are you going to get a 12-year-old?
Right.
And yet the 12-year-old is still hoping for that big car set where you put it down and it spins around and you put it in the park, like all of those things. But that's not like necessarily the appropriate gift for a 12-year-old.
Right.
And so there's disappointment. And so using nostalgia to say, well, Christmases used to be so much better.
Right.
And I think we do this a lot in our society.
Yep.
Of looking back in the past and saying things used to be much better. And I know that there's a lot of people listening right now that are in their head saying like, well, yeah, because it was.
Yeah, because it wasn't X, Y, and Z.
Right.
Yeah.
But I want to challenge that because I think that so often we look back on the past and we either pick out the things that we really loved or we choose to and also we choose to ignore the things that were really hard. Because if you look back like 100 years ago, we were coming out of World War I, heading towards World War II,
right?
Economic crisis all over.
Sorry, just for a second. 1920s and 30s,
we
World War
just
I,
finished the flu.
The Great Depression, the Spanish flu. Oh, another world war.
Right. You go back 1,000 years and all of a sudden, we have mass poverty and hunger, famine, plague. Like, anyone who is thriving right now would be not thriving 1,000 years ago if they were keeping their same stations or the equivalent.
Right.
If we go back, to 0 BC, we have the conquering of nations. We have barbarians coming in and destroying country.
Average age of life was 30, 40 years old.
Yeah.
I'd be dead.
You'd be dead.
Yeah.
I'd be an old man.
Yeah.
Like, it's just, I think that we tend to focus on the things that we really loved, forget the hardship.
Yeah.
And that does not help us in the present, because I wonder if, I'm certain of this, that in 20 years we'll look fondly back on elements of 2020.
We will. Well, absolutely.
It's just the way that we operate.
Well, but think about, I'm going to go political for a second. Think about how we look back on past presidents.
Oh, yeah.
Right? We hail Carter and Reagan and Bush and, even some Clinton and, Obama and Bush Jr. Like, we look back at them and go, okay, they did some really great things. But in the mix of it, we're like, no.
Yeah, didn't Reagan have like super, super low ratings?
Oh, he did.
Until like halfway through his second presidency.
He was chastised. He was ridiculed for being just a playboy and an actor and all this kind of stuff.
And most of my childhood, I definitely grew up in a Republican household. He was lauded as one of the best presidents ever.
Still.
And yeah, we forget, like, we don't see the whole picture. And I think that it's devastating to us sometimes.
Well, right. Well, but you as you were talking, I was just thinking about how have the 20s been for you compared to the teens?
They feel like completely different lifetimes.
Right. And probably pretty cool, right?
Yeah.
Right. I thought my 20s were fantastic. Like the decade of the 30s has been wonderful. Mm-hmm. Like I'm looking forward, like this is countercultural. I'm looking forward to being 40 and hitting my 40s.
Yep.
Because I've heard that's a fantastic, because you know who you are. You've got your, like.
My mom couldn't wait to get to 40.
Right. But we don't, that's so countercultural because we're always looking back. And so I think that's where nostalgic can be bad, if we're not going, okay, backwards was good. And here's some of the good things.
Yeah.
Passive coping skills that I can take that are healthy and that kind of stuff. Things that I want to teach my kids and my family, and things I want to remember. And I can't wait till next year.
When you bring up a really interesting point too, because I think part of nostalgia can dive into self-image as well. Of my body is very different than it was in high school.
Well, you also have a kid.
Yes. But I know that there are times that I look back on clothing that I wore in high school and I want to be able to wear it again.
Yeah.
Or I look back on pictures and I think like, oh man, why don't I look like that anymore?
Yeah.
And I think that is another way that this nostalgia can hit us a little sideways, is because I have to recognize that was a teenage body.
Right.
I was 16.
Yeah.
Like my metabolism was already really high and I was on Concerta, which was boosting it anyways. Like there's no way that my 27-year-old body is going to be able to keep up with that. Now there are definitely things that I can do to, see like, oh, there is potential in my body that I can get to this place.
Yep.
But I need to be realistic about now as well, that is not my body today.
Well, it's not like you have anything else going on right now.
Right.
Right.
Seeing the context, seeing the perspective. And I think that oftentimes we can be really hard on ourselves of saying like, well, I used to be this, I used to do this, I used to be this thing, and not remember like, okay, but also you didn't have a job, you didn't have a family that you were responsible for. Like, you didn't have all these things. And so you were able to do different things. Right. And that was okay. And what you're doing now is okay as well.
Yep. So with that in mind, what are some takeaways we can give our listeners? Because I think we've created a lot of questions, and I'm wondering, what are some action steps of utilizing nostalgia in a good way, self-identity in a good, all that kind of stuff.
Yeah. Sorry, I have the Phantom of the Opera song. Think of me, think of me fondly. I think we should think back fondly. Like, there's nothing wrong innately with nostalgia.
No.
I think it's a natural response to distress and to remembering our childhoods and times that were really good.
But why do you think they use it in marketing? Why is Pepsi doing retro cans? And why is parachute pants back in style? And why are
it has so much meaning?
Scrunchies.
For us. Oh yeah. Yep.
But because it
perms.
Yeah, because it actually it touches something in us that is a good thing.
Yeah, it's something precious and beautiful. I think that it is also important for us to take stock of how much time we're spending nostalgically.
Yeah.
And to attempt to broaden our perspective on how we're seeing things in the past and how we're seeing things now. So
I would encourage you to look back on things and pick something that, or a couple things that you enjoyed as a kid that you want to really reintegrate, whether it be, we've talked about a bunch of different things, whether it be a board game, video game, music, fashion, or Legos, or a TV show. I think it's healthy. But if that's all it becomes, I think there's some problems with that.
Yeah.
Balance, rhythms, I would love to hear from our listeners what's something nostalgic for them. So shoot us an email, hit us up on social media, and let us know.